best revenge is not to be like your enemy. These words from Marcus Aurelius contain a profound truth that most people never understand. In a world designed to trigger your reactions, your greatest power lies not in what you do, but in what you refuse to do. Not in how you respond, but in how you remain unmoved. Every day, people around you are unconsciously trying to pull you into their emotional chaos. They want you angry, defensive, reactive. They want you to lose your composure so they can feel better about losing theirs. And the moment you react, you've given them exactly what they wanted. You've handed over your power. But what if I told you that your refusal to react isn't just a strategy? It's a profound psychological principle that reveals the deepest truths about human nature, power, and the unconscious mind. The psychology of provocation. Carl Jung understood something about human behavior that most people never recognize. We are constantly projecting our inner conflicts onto others. When someone tries to provoke you, they're not really attacking you. They're attacking the parts of themselves they can't accept. Jung called this projection, and it's one of the most powerful forces shaping human interaction. Think about the last time someone really got under your skin. What were they actually doing? They were likely displaying qualities that you either possess and hate about yourself, or qualities that you fear you might possess. The person who calls you lazy might be struggling with their own productivity. The person who accuses you of being selfish might be wrestling with their own guilt about not giving enough. This is why staying composed is so powerful. It forces people to confront their own projections. When you don't react, you become a mirror that reflects their inner turmoil back to them. And most people can't handle that level of self-awareness, so they escalate their attempts to get you to react. Jung recognized that the unconscious mind is constantly seeking to discharge its tensions through others. When someone is carrying unresolved anger, fear, or shame, they unconsciously look for ways to transfer those feelings to someone else. Your reaction becomes their relief valve. Your emotional chaos becomes their temporary peace. But when you stay composed, you're essentially saying, "I won't carry your emotional baggage for you." You're forcing them to deal with their own psychological material instead of dumping it on you. This is why composed people are often seen as threatening. They refuse to participate in the unconscious emotional exchanges that most people rely on. The shadow's desperate need for reaction. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we've rejected, denied, or hidden from conscious awareness. These rejected aspects don't disappear. They live in the unconscious, constantly seeking expression and recognition. And one of the primary ways the shadow seeks expression is through provoking reactions in others. When someone tries to make you angry, they're often acting out their own repressed anger. When someone tries to make you feel guilty, they're projecting their own unresolved guilt. When someone tries to make you feel small, they're expressing their own feelings of inadequacy. The shadow uses other people as a stage for its own psychological drama. This is why certain people seem to have an uncanny ability to push your buttons. They're not necessarily more skilled at manipulation. They're simply expressing shadow material that resonates with your own unconscious conflicts. The buttons they push are the ones connected to your own shadow material. Understanding this dynamic is liberating because it reveals that their provocations have nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own psychological state. When you realize that someone's attempt to provoke you is actually their shadow crying out for recognition and integration, you can respond with compassion rather than reactivity. The person who constantly criticizes others is usually struggling with harsh self-criticism. The person who tries to make others feel guilty is usually drowning in their own guilt. The person who attempts to humiliate others is usually carrying deep shame. When you see the shadow behind the provocation, it becomes much easier to stay composed. The individuation process and emotional mastery. Jung's concept of individuation, The process of becoming who you truly are is intimately connected to emotional mastery. As you individuate, you become less reactive to external provocations because you're no longer unconsciously seeking validation or avoiding rejection from others. You develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. Most people are emotionally dependent on others in ways they don't recognize. They need others to validate their worth, confirm their beliefs, or provide emotional regulation. This dependency makes them incredibly vulnerable to manipulation and provocation. When someone threatens their source of validation, they react defensively. When someone challenges their beliefs, they react aggressively. But the individuated person has developed internal sources of validation and emotional regulation. They don't need others to confirm their worth because they've developed a stable sense of self. They don't need others to agree with them because they've learned to trust their own judgment. This internal stability makes them nearly impossible to provoke. The process of individuation requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of immediately reacting to uncomfortable emotions, you learn to sit with them, understand them, and integrate them. This capacity to hold tension without immediately discharging it through reaction is the foundation of emotional mastery. When someone tries to provoke you, they're essentially asking you to discharge their tension for them. But if you've developed the capacity to hold tension, you can simply absorb their provocation without needing to react. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means having enough psychological container to hold them without immediately acting them out. The power dynamics of reaction. Every interaction contains an element of power dynamics, and reaction is one of the primary ways power is transferred between people. When you react emotionally to someone's provocation, you're essentially giving them control over your internal state. You're allowing them to determine your emotional experience, which is one of the most intimate forms of power. Nietzsche understood this dynamic when he wrote about the will to power, the fundamental drive to exert influence and control. People who provoke reactions are often unconsciously seeking to experience their own power through your loss of control. Your anger validates their ability to affect you. Your defensiveness confirms their ability to threaten you. Your reaction becomes proof of their significance. This is why staying composed is such a powerful assertion of personal sovereignty. When you refuse to react, you're essentially saying, "You don't have the power to control my internal state." You're maintaining ownership of your emotional experience, regardless of external provocations. The Stoics understood this principle deeply. Epictetus taught that we cannot control external events, but we can control our responses to them. This isn't just philosophical wisdom, it's a practical understanding of where real power lies. The person who can remain composed under pressure has access to a form of power that reactive people can never touch. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal that became Meditations, constantly reminded himself that other people's actions could not harm his essential self unless he allowed them to. He understood that reaction was a choice, and that choosing non-reaction was often the most powerful response available. The unconscious hooks and conscious choice. Jung recognized that we all have unconscious hooks, psychological vulnerabilities that others can exploit to provoke reactions. These hooks are usually connected to our deepest insecurities, unhealed wounds, or unintegrated shadow material. The person who knows your hooks can manipulate you with surgical precision. But here's what most people don't understand. The goal isn't to eliminate these hooks entirely. It's to become conscious of them. When you're aware of your psychological vulnerabilities, you can choose how to respond when they're triggered. Consciousness transforms automatic reaction into conscious choice. Think about your own hooks. What kinds of comments or behaviors consistently trigger strong reactions in you? accusations of incompetence, suggestions that you're selfish, implications that you're not good enough. These reactions point to areas where you haven't fully integrated aspects of yourself. The person who's terrified of being seen as incompetent will react strongly to any suggestion of failure. The person who's carrying guilt about their selfishness will become defensive when accused of not caring enough. The person who doubts their own worth will react intensely to any perceived slight or dismissal. But when you've done the psychological work to integrate these aspects of yourself, the hooks lose their power. If you've accepted that you're sometimes incompetent, accusations of incompetence won't trigger you. If you've integrated your capacity for selfishness, being called selfish won't provoke a reaction. If you've developed genuine self-worth, others' opinions of you become interesting, but not determining. The collective, unconscious, and mass reaction. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious helps explain why certain provocations seem to trigger entire groups of people simultaneously. We share not only personal unconscious material, but also collective psychological patterns that can be activated by skilled manipulators. In our current cultural moment, we see this dynamic playing out constantly in social media, politics, and public discourse. Certain words, images, or ideas are specifically chosen because they activate collective psychological triggers. The goal is to bypass rational thought and provoke immediate emotional reaction. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for maintaining composure in a reactive world. When you see large groups of people reacting emotionally to the same stimulus, you can recognize that collective unconscious material is being activated. This awareness allows you to step back and choose your response, rather than being swept up in the collective reaction. The person who understands these dynamics has a significant advantage in navigating modern life. They can see through attempts at mass manipulation and maintain their psychological sovereignty, even when everyone around them is losing theirs. The art of strategic non-reaction. Staying composed doesn't mean being passive or emotionally dead. It means developing the capacity to choose your responses based on wisdom rather than impulse. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Sometimes a calm, measured reply is more devastating than any emotional outburst could be. Machiavelli understood this principle when he wrote about the importance of appearing unaffected by your enemy's attempts to provoke you. He recognized that emotional reaction reveals vulnerability, while composure suggests strength and control. The leader who can remain calm under pressure inspires confidence, while the leader who reacts emotionally creates doubt about their stability. This doesn't mean suppressing all emotion or becoming robotic. It means developing what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to feel your emotions fully while choosing how to express them. You can be angry without acting angrily. You can be hurt without becoming defensive. You can be frustrated without losing your temper. The key is creating space between stimulus and response. When someone tries to provoke you, instead of reacting immediately, you pause. In that pause, you can ask yourself, what is this person really trying to accomplish? What would serve me best in this situation? How can I respond in a way that aligns with my values rather than their agenda? The transformation of conflict. When you consistently refuse to react to provocations, something interesting happens. The nature of your relationships begins to change. People who were previously able to manipulate you through emotional triggers find that their old strategies no longer work. This forces them to either develop more mature ways of relating to you or to move on to easier targets. Jung believed that every relationship offers an opportunity for psychological growth. When you stop participating in unconscious emotional exchanges, you create space for more conscious, authentic connection. The people who are capable of growth will rise to meet this new level of interaction. Those who aren't will often remove themselves from your life. This process can be initially uncomfortable because it disrupts established patterns of relating. People who are used to getting reactions from you may escalate their provocations when their usual methods stop working. But if you maintain your composure through this testing period, the relationship either evolves to a healthier dynamic or naturally ends. The relationships that survive this transformation are typically much more satisfying because they're based on genuine connection rather than unconscious psychological exchanges. When you're not constantly reacting to others' projections, you can actually see and relate to who they really are. The ripple effect of composure. Your refusal to react doesn't just affect your immediate relationships. It creates ripples that extend far beyond your personal interactions. When you model emotional regulation and psychological sovereignty, you give others permission to develop these qualities themselves. Jung understood that psychological development is contagious. When one person in a family, workplace, or community begins to individuate and develop emotional mastery, it creates pressure for others to grow as well. Your composure becomes a mirror that reflects others' reactivity back to them, often motivating them to develop greater self-awareness. This is why composed people often become natural leaders, even when they're not seeking leadership roles. Others are drawn to their stability and emotional reliability. In a world full of reactive people, someone who can remain centered becomes a valuable resource for others seeking their own emotional equilibrium. The practice of conscious non-reaction. Developing the ability to stay composed under provocation is a practice that requires patience, self-awareness, and commitment. It's not something you master overnight, but rather a skill that deepens over time with consistent application. Start by becoming aware of your own reaction patterns. Notice what kinds of situations, people, or comments consistently trigger strong emotional responses in you. These are your psychological hooks, and awareness of them is the first step toward freedom from them. When you feel yourself being triggered, practice creating space between the stimulus and your response. Take a breath, count to 10, or simply pause before speaking. In that space, you can choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. Remember that the goal isn't to become emotionally numb or to never feel strong emotions. The goal is to develop the capacity to feel your emotions fully while choosing how to express them. You can acknowledge your anger without acting angrily. You can recognize your hurt without becoming defensive. Practice seeing provocations as information about the other person's psychological state rather than attacks on your character. When someone tries to make you angry, they're usually expressing their own unresolved anger. When someone tries to make you feel guilty, they're often projecting their own guilt. This perspective makes it much easier to respond with compassion rather than reactivity. The ultimate freedom. The ability to remain composed when others are trying to provoke you represents one of the highest forms of psychological freedom. It means you're no longer at the mercy of other people's emotional states or unconscious projections. You've developed the capacity to choose your responses based on your own values and wisdom, rather than being controlled by external provocations. This freedom doesn't come from suppressing your humanity or becoming emotionally disconnected. It comes from developing such a strong sense of self that external provocations can't destabilize your internal equilibrium. You become like a mountain that remains unmoved by the storms that rage around it. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development was to become who you truly are, free from the unconscious influences and projections of others. When you can stay composed in the face of provocation, you're demonstrating that you've achieved a significant degree of this psychological sovereignty. In a world that profits from your reactions, your composure becomes an act of rebellion. In a culture that feeds on emotional chaos, your stability becomes a form of resistance. In a society that wants you triggered and reactive, Your calm presence becomes a powerful statement about what's possible when someone commits to their own psychological development. The next time someone tries to provoke you, remember, they want you to react because your reaction serves their psychological needs, not yours. Your composure, on the other hand, serves your highest good and models what's possible for anyone willing to do the inner work of becoming truly free. If this exploration of psychological composure has revealed new insights about the power dynamics in your own life, you'll find our channel full of similar revelations. We explore the hidden psychological forces that shape human behavior, from why you attract what you fear most, to why trying harder makes everything worse, to why having more choices makes you miserable.